The morning of September 11th began like any other in New York City. The streets pulsed with restless energy, taxis honked in endless rhythm, and the sun broke through the haze above the Hudson with a golden glow. People hurried, some clutching coffee cups, others balancing briefcases, all wrapped in the private urgency of their lives. None of them knew how fragile that ordinary rhythm truly was. None of them guessed that history was waiting, suspended in the sky, carried on wings of steel. At John F. Kennedy Airport, a young woman pressed her forehead against the glass of a terminal window, watching a plane taxi down the runway. In lower Manhattan, a man adjusted his tie in the elevator mirror as he rose toward the 102nd floor of the North Tower. Across the river in Brooklyn, a firefighter tightened the laces of his boots, sipping the last of his lukewarm coffee. The day was opening like a book, its first pages bright and unsuspecting. But above the city, high in the endless blue, something darker was already unfolding, moving silently toward the skyline that defined America. The sky was too clear, too calm, too beautiful, a silence before the unthinkable. The sun climbed higher, spilling light across the mirrored faces of the Twin Towers. The towers caught the morning like prisms, reflecting brilliance in every direction, dazzling the eyes of commuters as they crossed the plaza below. The air was crisp for September, carrying the faint smell of roasted peanuts from a vendor's cart and the stronger tang of exhaust from yellow cabs that lined the streets. For Michael Turner, the world moved in fragments, glimpses of faces, horns blaring, the staccato beat of shoes against concrete. He balanced his coffee as he weaved between tourists taking photographs. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he muttered in annoyance. "Yeah, I'm on my way," he answered briskly, his voice tight. Work always demanded speed, but lately it felt like life itself was a race he was losing. Nearby, Angela Rivera pushed through the revolving doors of the South Tower. Inside, the lobby gleamed, polished marble floors catching the light. She greeted the security guard with a friendly nod. He knew her name, knew her smile, one of those small, human connections in a place filled with thousands of anonymous faces. Angela adjusted her purse strap and thought about her younger brother, who had promised to call her later about their mother's birthday dinner. It was a small thing, but small things were the rhythm of her life. On the streets below, David Klein, a college student from Ohio, stared upward with wide eyes. He had never seen buildings so tall, so impossibly massive. His parents stood beside him, maps and cameras in hand, their voices rising with excitement. David took a picture of the towers, not knowing it would be the last image on his roll of film. He thought, fleetingly, that they seemed eternal, like mountains forged of steel. At a cafe across the river in Jersey City, Claire Donovan, a journalist, tapped her pen against her notebook. She was working on a piece about urban renewal, something she privately found dull. She sipped her coffee, distracted, her gaze drifting to the skyline visible through the window. The towers stood there, proud and unshakable, symbols not just of commerce, but of ambition. She had always felt they were watching her, guardians of the city. She didn't know that soon they would demand her words in ways she could not yet imagine. For the firefighters at Engine 10, Ladder 10, the morning was quiet. Daniel Cho leaned back in his chair, boots planted firmly on the floor, while Luis Hernandez flipped through the sports section. The banter flowed easily, an old song of friendship and shared duty. Outside, the world roared with traffic, but inside the station, time moved more slowly. "You think we'll get a call today?" Luis asked idled. Daniel shrugged. "Always do. Question is how bad it'll be." None of them could know how soon the alarms would scream, how quickly their lives would be rewritten. Back in the towers, Rachel Stein opened her briefcase and spread her notes across her desk. Her office overlooked the city, a panoramic sweep of rooftops and rivers. Bridges stretched like veins across the water. She loved this vantage point. It made her feel untouchable, high above the noise and clutter below. She didn't know that soon the noise would rise to meet her, louder and more terrible than anything she had ever imagined. And far above, invisible to the millions of eyes below, the silver body of a plane cut across the blue, moving steadily toward the city. Inside, tension thickened the air. Passengers exchanged fearful glances, but the world beneath continued its rhythm, oblivious to the shadow descending from the sky. New York was alive that morning, so vividly alive. Every heartbeat, every laugh, every hurried step was a thread in the fabric of the city. No one knew how fragile that fabric truly was. No one imagined it could unravel in an instant. The clock ticked closer to 8:46. Airports had their own rhythm, endless tide of rolling suitcases, loudspeaker announcements, and the metallic scent of recycled air. On the morning of September 11th, Boston's Logan International Airport pulsed with that familiar energy, the hum of people on the move, all of them bound for destinations that, in their minds, were routine. For Peter Lawson, a businessman in his early 40s, boarding the plane was nothing more than another step in a long series of obligations. His suit jacket was neatly pressed, his laptop tucked carefully into his briefcase. He thought about the meeting waiting for him in Los Angeles, the charts he still needed to polish before he arrived. As he walked through the terminal, his phone pressed to his ear, he didn't notice the nervous faces around him, didn't sense the undercurrent of unease in the air. To him, it was just another flight. Nearby, Emily Carter, a graduate student, clutched her boarding pass like a lifeline. She had never flown cross-country alone before. Her eyes lingered on the wide glass windows that looked out onto the runway, where the morning sun gleamed on the silver skin of the waiting plane. She had been excited for weeks about a research conference in California. She told herself this was her chance to prove she belonged in her field. She didn't notice the way one of the men in line avoided eye contact, his jaw tense, his shoulders stiff. At the gate, families with children shuffled forward, their voices rising in small complaints and reassurances. A little girl clutched a stuffed bear to her chest, its fur worn thin from years of love. Her father lifted her up, pointing toward the airplane parked outside. "That's ours," he said, smiling. The girl squealed, her joy pure, untainted by the storm already brewing. The flight crew moved with practiced ease. Captain John Peterson, a man of calm authority with decades of experience, greeted his first officer with a firm handshake. They reviewed the flight plan, their voices steady, professional, carrying the weight of routine. To them, this was simply another day at work, another long haul to the West Coast. In the galley, Sarah Whitman, a flight attendant, checked the stock of drinks and snacks. She hummed softly to herself, a habit that calmed her nerves. She loved her job, though the hours were long and the demands constant. Today, she reminded herself, would be no different. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear and smiled at a passenger as they stepped onto the plane. The cabin filled slowly. Strangers brushed past one another, sliding into seats, stowing bags overhead. Conversations began, polite exchanges, shared complaints about security lines, jokes about cramped legroom. In the midst of it all, the men sat quietly, their eyes sharp, their movements precise. They did not join the chatter. They did not smile. On the tarmac, the engines roared to life. The vibrations trembled through the floor, through the seats, through the hearts of those who sat waiting. Emily closed her eyes, whispering a small prayer. Peter opened his laptop, already typing notes. The little girl hugged her bear tighter. The doors closed. The world outside was sealed away. The plane rolled forward, guided by unseen hands, carrying within it hundreds of lives, each bound together by fate, though none of them yet knew it. The sky above Boston was as clear and endless as the one above New York. To clear, to calm, to beautiful. The elevators in the North Tower carried their passengers upward with a soft, mechanical hum, rising through steel and glass until the doors opened to reveal the vast world above. At the very top, on the 107th floor, the restaurant windows on the world prepared for another day of business. The dining room sparkled in the morning sun. White tablecloths were freshly pressed, silverware gleamed, and the windows tall and endless offered a view unlike any other on earth. The city stretched out in every direction, bridges like threads across the water, skyscrapers rising like proud monuments. Anthony DeLuca, the maitre d', adjusted his tie and walked the floor, checking every detail with a sharp eye. He prided himself on perfection. To him, the restaurant wasn't just a place to eat, it was an experience, a stage upon which New York displayed its elegance to the world. Tourists marveled at the views, executives signed deals over wine, couples celebrated anniversaries. Anthony loved the way people's faces lit up when they first saw the skyline from here. At one of the corner tables, Karen Mitchell, a marketing executive, sipped her coffee as she reviewed her presentation notes. She had a meeting later that morning with potential clients. She tapped her pen against the paper, distracted by the brightness of the day. She thought of her husband, who had kissed her goodbye in Queens only 2 hours earlier. "Have a good one," he had said. She had smiled, promising to call him after lunch. Farther down in the South Tower, office life unfolded in its own rhythm. Phones rang, printers buzzed, voices echoed in open spaces. Angela Rivera, freshly arrived at her desk, booted up her computer and sorted through her stack of memos. She joked with a colleague about the endless paperwork, her laughter light, effortless. On her desk sat a framed photo of her younger brother and mother, their smiles grounding her in the chaos of corporate life. Meanwhile, in the North Tower, Michael Turner finally arrived at his cubicle, slightly breathless from his rush. He dropped his coffee onto the desk, narrowly avoiding a spill over his papers. His boss walked by, giving him a pointed look. Michael offered a quick nod, already opening spreadsheets. To him, today was like any other. Deadlines, numbers, the constant race to stay ahead. On the 92nd floor, Rachel Stein gathered with 2 colleagues in the conference room. They discussed contracts, arguments flowing back and forth with professional sharpness. Yet every so often Rachel's eyes drifted to the window, to the beauty of the morning. The sky was impossibly clear, so bright it almost hurt to look at. She thought fleetingly how strange it was, such perfection on an ordinary Tuesday. At ground level, in the bustling lobby of the North Tower, tourists waited for the elevators, craning their necks to stare upward through the glass atrium. A group of Japanese visitors spoke excitedly, cameras clicking, while a Midwestern family shuffled their children forward. The security guards managed the crowd with practiced calm. For them, it was routine. The towers always breathed with life, always welcomed the world. Outside, the plaza filled with the noise of footsteps and chatter. Workers bought bagels from vendors, pigeons scattered at sudden movements, and the fountain gurgled steadily. The towers loomed above, their shadows stretching long in the morning light. They had become part of the city's identity, symbols of power and permanence. But inside, behind the glass, the lives unfolding were fragile, unaware of how close they stood to the edge of history. The clock ticked toward 8:30. The shift was subtle at first. A flicker of movement, a raised voice, the scrape of a seatbelt buckle. Most passengers hardly noticed until the tension snapped like a string pulled to tight. In row 8, a man leapt into the aisle, his voice sharp and commanding in a language many did not understand. Gasps rippled through the cabin as he brandished a small blade, its edge catching the light. "Stay seated. Stay quiet," he shouted. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. The older woman beside her clutched her arm, eyes wide with terror. Children began to cry, their parents wrapping them in desperate embraces. Sarah Whitman stopped in the aisle, her heart slamming against her ribs. She had been trained for emergencies, fires, turbulence, even unruly passengers, but nothing like this. "Please, everyone, stay calm," she tried to say, but her voice trembled. At the front of the cabin, 2 of the men surged toward the cockpit. A struggle erupted near the door. The captain's voice crackled briefly over the intercom, urgent, confused, cut short. Then silence. The cockpit door slammed shut. Peter Lawson dropped his laptop, the screen snapping closed with a hollow clap. He stared, disbelief painted across his face. This couldn't be real. This was something from a nightmare, not a business flight to Los Angeles. Across the aisle, the little girl with the stuffed bear began to sob. Her father pulled her close, whispering frantically, "It's okay, it's okay," though his own eyes betrayed the lie. The hijackers moved quickly, their plan unfolding with chilling precision. One stood watch in the aisle, blade flashing whenever someone shifted too suddenly. Another barked orders, forcing passengers back into their seats. The atmosphere thickened with fear, as if the air itself had grown heavier. Emily's hands shook uncontrollably. She tried to breathe, tried to think. Her mind replayed her mother's voice that morning. "Call me when you land, sweetheart." She wanted to believe she still would. Sarah edged backward, her eyes darting to the phone mounted on the bulkhead. If she could reach it, she could send a signal. But every move felt dangerous, every breath too loud. Inside the cockpit, the captain and first officer fought desperately, but they were outnumbered. The controls shifted, the steady hum of the engines straining as the plane veered from its course. In the cabin, passengers felt the tilt. A collective murmur rose, panic mixing with disbelief. Air sickness bags rustled. Someone whispered. Returning Emily looked out the window. The horizon had changed. The plane was banking sharply, no longer westward, no longer toward Los Angeles. It was turning back east toward New York. The sky remained clear, serene, as though mocking the chaos inside the cabin. The passengers sat trapped between disbelief and terror, their lives now bound to an unseen destination, carried on wings of steel toward a fate none of them could imagine. The city had no warning. At 8:46 a.m., the rhythm of New York hits Texas, its footsteps, its hurried conversations was torn apart by a roar from above. On Liberty Street, Michael Turner had just stepped out to buy another coffee when the sound came, so sudden and violent it rattled the windows. He looked up instinctively, squinting into the bright sky. What he saw didn't make sense. A silver plane, far too low, far too fast, cut across the horizon and disappeared into the North Tower with a thunderclap that split the morning open. The impact was a terrible collision of sound metal screaming against metal, glass shattering in 1,000 directions, fire blooming outward in a violent burst of orange and black. Debris rained down like meteors, paper fluttered through the sky, and a shockwave rippled through the streets. Michael dropped his coffee. His mouth opened, but no words came. On the 92nd floor, Rachel Stein was mid-sentence in a meeting when the world erupted. The room convulsed, lights flickered, and the floor beneath her seemed to shudder. The blast threw her against the wall, knocking the breath from her chest. Papers scattered like snow. Someone screamed. Another voice shouted, "Get out! Get out!" But no one knew which way was safe. Smoke was already pouring into the hall. The smell of jet fuel choked the air. Rachel staggered to her feet, clutching the edge of the conference table, her ears ringing, her mind refusing to grasp what had happened. At Windows on the World, the restaurant was filled with tourists and businessmen, many with coffee cups half raised when the explosion shook the room. The building lurched, glasses toppled, and the panoramic view police officers, paramedics. They carried axes, hoses, stretchers. Their faces were set, grim but determined. Hearts, duty carried them forward, step by step, into the jaws of history. day had descended into nightmare. The south tower groaned from the wound in its side. Fire spread across the floors, thick smoke billowed into hallways, and the stairwells became rivers of panic. Michael turned to the fire to save others, and some, with nowhere else to go, chose the sky. At first, the crowd thought the fall for air, his suit torn, his body trembling from exhaustion. He had just staggered. The unthinkable happened. The proud twin towers crumbled into dust, leaving only smoke and ruin where they had once touched the sky. The collapse was more than the fall of buildings. It was the shattering of certainty, the breaking of a nation's hands raw, their eyes hollow. They searched not for survivors, those hopes had faded, but for